Okay, I'm going to get started as people continue to join the call. But good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rachel Bovard. I'm with the Internet Accountability Project. We're a group of conservatives that are concerned about the growing power of big tech, and we're interested in facilitating conversations over what to do about it. So to that end, joining me this afternoon is Senator Marsha Blackburn, who's the United States Senator from the state of Tennessee. And she comes to that position after having served for many years as the Congresswoman from the 7th District of Tennessee in the House of Representatives. She's been active on technology issues for a very long time and continues to do so in her positions on the Senate Commerce Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. So, Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, good to be with you. Thank you.
So we're tight on time, so I'm going to get right to it. Before we get into the details a little bit of the data privacy issues surrounding big tech, I want to ask you, in this current pandemic, it's really revealed the necessity of big tech. Obviously, we're having this call on Zoom. We couldn't do it without tech. But it's also, I think, shown how much power tech has. And the framing of this debate has changed a little bit. Some people are trying to say the techlash is over because tech has proven itself useful, so it's immune from criticism. So I want to put that question to you. Is the techlash over?
Oh, well, I tell you, anybody that is keeping an eye on what we have done in the past year at Commerce and then also at Judiciary Committee and with the Tech Task Force at Judiciary that I've been leading, I think they pretty well know that that's not true. Before our committee schedule got derailed by all of the lockdowns, we were in the middle of doing what I called a deep dive into how the companies operate, how they collect their data, how they are holding and mining that data, and how they then put that data to use or use it to create a revenue stream. And I would say actually that this is just the beginning of a tech lash, if you want to call it that. And I would say that because the companies that we've looked at so far and worked with don't just want a conversation about privacy. What they're wanting is for Congress to do something about this and to get some things on the books. And they know and appreciate why their businesses and their practices around privacy are under a microscope. I think they're nervous about what that backlash could be if they implement rules, if they jump in kind of as a quick reaction and implement rules that their users don't understand or have not followed. And because of that, one of the things we hear is they would like for Congress to put some guidelines in place, kind of the rails of the road that would simplify this and then say, you have to meet this standard, and then it's up to you to reveal your practices to your consumer base.
So one of the other interesting things I think about this pandemic is it's revealed obviously just how adversarial China is to our interests. But big tech is entangled with China, not just their supply chains, but how their tech is used by the Chinese government to suppress minorities and suppress individual freedoms. So as the US posture changes toward China, should big tech's posture change as well?
I think that, yes, you're going to see big tech's posture change. Look at what happened with Apple and the iPhone. And the reason this posture is going to change is because consumer sentiments and preferences are changing. I had a neat conversation, a young mom, and she had been shopping. Of course, in Tennessee, things are opening up. We're not in lockdown like they are here in DC or in New York City. And she said, I looked at where every single thing I purchased was made. And I'm going to be a consumer that is not going to preference China. And more consumers are going to do that because, and as it does, that's what's going to change the relationship of big tech with China, because they're going to want to keep their customer base and keep them updating, buying new devices.
So I want to turn back to something you've been working on for a long time, and that's data privacy. You've been a leader on this issue with the introduction of the Browser Act. It seems that Congress is finally catching up to you in that regard. So what is it that concerns you the most? You touched on this a little bit, but what concerns you the most about the data and protecting consumers from this constant surveillance that they're under from these tech companies?
Right, and it is making people uneasy. It is making parents uneasy. But because people are talking about this and it is affecting their everyday life, you're right. A lot of my colleagues are catching up with me on this. And what you're beginning to say is people say, hey, I really do think we need to allow people to opt in. Yeah, I think that's a really great starting point. Now, one of the drivers in this decision process is virtual classrooms. And if you want to take the example, Google has really made a name for itself in the education space with Chromebooks and with Wi-Fi hotspots for students. Some of them even on school buses, and school buses have been driven out to fire halls and community centers so that kids can come in and use internet to complete their work when they live in an area that does not have access to high-speed internet. Well, if you look at what has happened with Google and these Chromebooks, and then you look at the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the complaint that they had filed, the white paper that they have done on this issue of students and privacy. New Mexico recently sued over allegations that Google was mishandling their students' data. This interaction, this is really the flashpoint of what is happening with students' data and how that is being mined and used for a revenue stream purpose without the consent of the parent and the data that is coming from minor children. This is elevating the issue of data handling, data mining, surveillance. Nobody wants to have somebody looking over their shoulder all the time. And so many people, whether it is children in school or whether it is individuals trying to conduct their business working from home and working remotely, and as we are hearing from companies now that going forward, you're going to see more allowance and utilization of remote work. It is not, it started out as something that was a luxury and it's become a necessity. So putting these guidelines down, as I mentioned earlier, allowing people to opt in and make these settings, this is something that is going to be moving forward as a requirement of Congress to take an action.
I want to ask you about something you just said in terms of requiring an opt-in. It implies that, you know, we can't really opt out right now. And that's the question I want to put to you, because the common refrain is, well, if you don't like Google, just don't use Google. But increasingly, that's not the world that we live in. So can you still opt out of these companies right now?
Well, and this is why people want there to be that icon that allows you to hit it and choose to opt in on how you want to set these privacy standards. To say, well, you can opt out if you want to. If you're using Google, you can opt out. If you click that, I accept, then if you want to go in and change and reset, it is like a treasure hunt expedition to find the way to reset privacy settings. It has to be easier for consumers. And we hear it. I hear from moms every day. I hear from employees who are working from home, and they are very concerned about this. They don't want the burden to be unfair to them. And right now, the way that burden is placed, and trying to find the way to reset these privacy settings is the burden is on them, and individuals, Google or whomever with their platforms need to be more explicit and more direct in how you can protect, as I say, your virtual you, protect that, your presence online.
Well, I think one of the other implications is, who owns that data, right? Do you own your virtual self? These platforms make all their money from our data, but do we have a right to it? Do they own our data, or do we?
Well, and you can look at it and say, one question would be a philosophical issue. Do you own it? Or a legal issue. Do you have a right to a property right in your data? And you could look at it that way. With our country, the way we have worked, we have considered that we indeed own our thoughts, our inventions. That is your ownership. So, but what we're doing right now is pushing the issue of transparency, user consent, and these companies in the future, I believe, are going to live or die by how well they inform you as to what they're going to do with your data when you are using their platform. People are going to be very hesitant to get on a platform that is not explicit in what they are doing and is not well defined and how they're going to protect you and your data. And for Congress, it becomes a balancing act. We don't want the legislation to be so restrictive that the whole industry collapses. And we know it's going to be a balancing act.
So on that note, again, coming back to the current era that we're living in with coronavirus, contact tracing is becoming, the thing of the day for tech companies. And Google and Apple recently obviously announced they're getting in on it. But a Washington Post poll showed that 3 out of 5 Americans won't use a contact tracing technology from these companies because they don't trust them. And so I put it to you, should we trust these platforms with the privacy promises they're making, or has their track record not been good enough?
Well, there are all sorts of questions around their track record. And I think fairness is also to say that the intended utilization of some of that has changed, and tracking health and location data is something that could be useful. We're hearing that indeed that is useful, but it really reveals some sensitive and personal information. You have seen some areas of the country, some localities that have revealed names or location of those that had COVID-19 to law enforcement. There are a lot of questions about that. Likewise, those questions are going to arrive at how that data is shared online. I am sponsoring legislation with Senators Thune and Moran and Wicker, the COVID-19 Consumer Data Protection Act. It would require companies under the jurisdiction of the FTC to obtain affirmative express consent. There we go with that opt-in from individuals to collect, process, or transfer their personal health, geolocation, or proximity information for the purpose of tracking the spread of COVID-19. Got some Browser Act provisions in there, Rachel. Direct companies to disclose to consumers at the point of collection how their data will be handled. So there has to be that express information given to the consumer, letting them know how it's going to be handled, how it's going to be transferred, and how long are they going to retain it, and who is going to have the access to that. It would also give some clear definitions about what constitutes aggregate and de-identified data to ensure that companies adopt certain technical and legal safeguards to protect consumer data from being re-identified. So that you've got to have that firewall and break that identity chain. And then it would require companies to allow individuals to opt out of the collection, so they could completely come out of that collection, processing, transfer process of their health geolocation or proximity information.
All right, one more question, because I know you're tight on time because the Senate,
Yeah.
like the House, is actually in session.
Yeah, the Senate's actually voting. So we're trying to get me there before we close the vote.
Real quick, I just wanted to ask you about Section 230, because I know it's
Yeah.
something you've been working on in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Section 230 obviously is the legal immunity given to these tech companies by Congress. The tech companies seem to talk about it a lot as a right, but it's a piece of law that can be changed. And so I would put it to you, do you think Section 30 or Section 230 should be reformed, and can it be done in a way that balances the need for innovation and certain amounts of Good Samaritan provisions, as well as?
Yeah, well, and I think what we have to look at there is Section 230 is not a right, and it's not just there for tech companies, it's for anybody that is doing business online, and we need to start with that understanding. So when we talk about Section 230 and the need for reforms, you're going to have changes that are going to work across platforms and across industries on this. And it's important that any measures that are taken, that you force more accountability for the protections. You need to think about child protections online. And we've got to be smart about how we go about this. The practical effects of Section 230 reform cannot be so expensive that only big tech can absorb the compliance cost. And that's a consideration that we do have to have. Businesses right now are very concerned about liability cost, and they're looking at the costs that they're incurring in order to continue to operate, in order to survive. So that is how we need to be approaching Section 230, but realizing it is there for everybody that is doing business online.
Well, thank you, Senator. I know you need to get to a vote, so we'll let you go, but we really appreciate your time and your work on these issues. For everybody on this call, please contact Garrett Ventry for a video recording of this and our yesterday's conversation with Congressman Ken Buck about antitrust. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Good to be with you. Thank you.